Salvation and Awakening, Reading the Myth of the Fall Through a Buddhist Lens by the Backyard Buddhist. Today, I'd like to reflect on two words that come from very different religious worlds, that salvation and awakening. For many people raised in the Christian tradition, salvation is one of the most familiar ideas in religious life. It speaks of humanity's estrangement from God, of sin, exile, forgiveness, redemption, and ultimately, reconciliation. Buddhism uses very different language. We speak of ignorance, suffering, attachment, liberation, and awakening. These traditions are not identical, and I don't want to pretend that their differences are unimportant. Christianity and Buddhism developed within different cultures, ask different theological questions, and offer different understandings of ultimate reality. But when I listen carefully to the ancient Christian story of humanity's fall from grace, I hear something deeply human within it. I hear the story of beings who feel separated from the source of life. I hear the story of people who know that something has gone wrong, but who cannot quite understand how to make it right. And I hear a longing to return home. The biblical story begins in a garden. Human beings live in paradise, created in the divine image and dwelling in intimacy with God. But they eat from the forbidden tree, and the harmony of the garden is broken. They become aware of their nakedness. They hide, they become afraid, they blame one another, and eventually they are expelled into a world of labor, suffering, conflict, and death. For many Christians, this story explains the human condition. It describes humanity's estrangement from God and our need for salvation. Buddhism tells no equivalent story. There is no creator whom humanity has disobeyed. There is no single historical moment when innocence was lost. There is no doctrine of original sin in the Buddhist tradition. And yet, Buddhism recognizes the condition of estrangement very clearly. The Dharma teaches that we suffer because we misunderstand reality. The Sanskrit word is avidya, usually translated as ignorance or fundamental unknowing. This ignorance is not merely a lack of information. It is not the kind of ignorance that can be corrected simply by reading another book or learning another fact. It is a deep misperception. We look at this flowing, changing, interconnected life and imagine that there is a permanent, separate self standing apart from it. We divide the world into me and everything else. We say, this is mine, that is yours. I must protect myself. I must become something. I must hold on to what pleases me and push away what frightens me. From this illusion of separation arise craving, clinging, aversion, fear, jealousy, anger, and despair. In Buddhist language, this is the beginning of suffering. So when I read the story of the fall through a Buddhist lens, I don't necessarily see the breaking of a divine command. I see the birth of separation. I see the moment when the mind begins to divide reality into self and other, sacred and profane, desirable and undesirable. The story says that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and suddenly the world was divided. Suddenly there was judgment. Suddenly there was shame. Suddenly there was someone who had to hide. Read as myth, the fall is not merely something that happened in a distant past. It is happening now. It happens whenever I cling to the idea that I am an isolated being moving through a hostile world. It happens whenever I become trapped within I, me, and mine. It happens whenever I forget the vast web of causes, conditions, relationships, and acts of generosity that make my life possible. In that sense, I fall from the garden many times each day. I fall when I reduce another human being to an opinion. I fall when I allow anger to erase compassion. I fall when I confuse my beliefs with reality itself. I fall when I imagine that my suffering belongs only to me. And I fall whenever I forget that the person standing before me is also vulnerable, also frightened, also impermanent, and also seeking freedom from suffering. From this perspective, what might salvation mean? In traditional Christianity, salvation is understood through the grace of God. It involves forgiveness, healing, reconciliation, and the restoration of communion between humanity and the divine. Buddhism does not speak of salvation in precisely this way. There is no divine judge from whom pardon must be received. But Buddhism does speak of liberation. It speaks of awakening from the delusion that creates suffering. The Buddha's teaching begins with an honest recognition. There is suffering. There is dissatisfaction. There is unease. Even the things we love cannot remain as we wish them to remain. Our bodies change, Our relationships change, our convictions change, our circumstances change. Everything we grasp is already moving. But the Buddha did not stop with the recognition of suffering. He taught that suffering has causes. He taught that those causes can be understood. And he taught that freedom is possible. In this sense, awakening is a kind of healing. It is the healing of our distorted perception. It is the gradual release of the illusion that we exist separately from the rest of life. It is not the destruction of the person. It is not self-annihilation. It is not becoming passive, blank, or indifferent. Awakening is learning to see the self clearly. It is seeing that what I call myself is not an isolated object, but a living relationship. I am made of earth, water, air, food, language, memory, ancestry, community, and countless acts of care. Nothing about me exists by itself. Zen master Eihei Dōgen wrote, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things." When Dōgen speaks of forgetting the self, he is not asking us to despise ourselves. He is not asking us to erase our personality or deny our ordinary human needs. To forget the self is to stop placing the self at the center of the universe. It is to release the constant project of defending, promoting, explaining, and protecting the imagined solidity of me. And when that defensive self relaxes, the world becomes intimate again. The cry of a bird is no longer merely something happening outside of me. The suffering of another person is no longer someone else's problem. The wind, the rain, the traffic, the laughter of a child, the grief of a stranger, all become part of the boundless field of practice. This is why Dōgen says that when the self is forgotten, we are enlightened by all things. We do not conquer reality. Reality teaches us. We do not possess the truth. The 10,000 things reveal it. Shohaku Okumura Roshi has often explained that Buddhist stories and teachings are not merely accounts of events from long ago. They describe the living reality of this moment. The fall is not only an ancient myth. Salvation is not only a future promise. Both are unfolding within the mind and heart right now. Each time I cling rigidly to I and mine, I experience exile. Each time I return to this breath, this body, this sound, and this moment, I take a step toward reconciliation. Each time I release resentment, I return. Each time I listen without preparing my defense, I return. Each time I recognize another person's suffering, I return. Each time I sit down in zazen and stop trying to make myself into something else, I return. This does not mean that zazen transports us into a perfect world. The world remains complicated. People still suffer. Injustice still exists. Bodies still become sick. Those whom we love still die. Awakening does not remove us from the realities of human life. It allows us to meet them without adding the unnecessary suffering created by resistance, hatred, and delusion. Thích Nhất Hạnh often spoke of the possibility of deep dialogue between Buddhism and Christianity. He wrote about the Buddha and Christ not as competitors, but as teachers whose lives continue to nourish compassion, understanding, and peace. This does not mean that the doctrines of Christianity and Buddhism become interchangeable. They do not. But it does suggest that sincere practitioners of both traditions may recognize a shared movement of the heart, a movement away from selfishness, a movement away from fear, a movement away from alienation, and a movement toward compassion, wisdom, intimacy, and love. A Christian may call this movement grace. A Buddhist may call it awakening. One may speak of reconciliation with God. The other may speak of realizing emptiness, dependent origination, or Buddha nature. The language is different. The metaphysical frameworks are different. But in lived experience, both paths may ask a similar question. Can I stop living as though I were separate from everything I love? For me, that question lies close to the heart of practice. When I imagine myself to be completely separate, I become afraid. When I become afraid, I cling. When I cling, I defend. When I defend, I often cause suffering. But when I see that my life is inseparable from the lives of others, compassion becomes more natural. I begin to understand that caring for another person is not separate from caring for myself. I begin to see that forgiveness is not weakness, it is the loosening of a chain. I begin to understand that kindness is not merely a moral obligation, it is a recognition of reality. From a Buddhist perspective, perhaps what we call sin can sometimes be understood as ignorance expressed through action. When we do not see clearly, we cause harm. We speak carelessly. We grasp at what cannot satisfy us. We objectify other people. We become enslaved to anger, greed, certainty, and fear. This does not excuse harmful behavior. Ignorance does not remove responsibility. In Buddhism, recognizing ignorance means becoming more accountable, not less. Once I see that my actions arise from confusion, I must practice differently. I must make amends where I can. I must cultivate wisdom. I must restrain actions that cause harm. And I must develop the compassion necessary to prevent the same harm from continuing. Salvation, viewed through this lens, becomes more than rescue. It becomes transformation. Awakening is not merely agreeing with Buddhist ideas. It is not memorizing sutras or adopting a spiritual identity. It is allowing the structure of our lives to change. We become less governed by craving, less controlled by fear, less certain of our own righteousness, and more available to the suffering of the world. This transformation does not usually happen all at once. Most of us do not awaken in a dramatic flash and remain permanently free of confusion. We wake up and then we fall asleep again. We remember and then we forget. We open the hand and then we grasp once more. But practice teaches us to return again and again, without self-condemnation, without despair, without imagining that one failure has expelled us forever from the garden. This is one of the great gifts of zazen. In zazen, there is nowhere else to go. There is no distant paradise to recover. There is no ideal version of myself that I must manufacture. There is only this body sitting, this breath moving, this thought appearing and disappearing, this whole universe expressing itself as this moment. When I become lost in thought, I return. When I become caught in judgment, I return. When memory carries me into the past, I return. When anxiety carries me into the future, I return. The return itself is the practice. Perhaps this is why the image of the garden remains so powerful. The garden represents intimacy with life. It represents a world before we divided everything into what we must possess and what we must reject. From a Zen perspective, however, the garden has not disappeared. It has not been locked behind us. It is not guarded by a flaming sword. The garden is this world, seen without the distortion of grasping. It is this life, experienced without the constant demand that it becomes something else. It is the ordinary world of dishes, bills, traffic, grief, laughter, illness, work, friendship, and breath. Nothing needs to be added, but something must be seen through. What must be seen through is the illusion that we stand outside the garden. We do not. We are the garden. We are the soil and the rain. We are the loss and the healing. We are the question and the path that opens beneath our feet. Each moment of zazen opens the gate. Each act of kindness opens the gate. Each apology opens the gate. Each mindful breath opens the gate. Each time we release hatred and choose compassion, the gate opens. And then perhaps we begin to understand the deepest teaching. There was never a gate. There was never a true separation. There was only the dream of separation and the possibility of awakening from it. So perhaps salvation and awakening are not identical, but they may speak to a shared human longing, the longing to be healed, the longing to come home, the longing to live without the burden of fear and alienation. In Zen, coming home does not mean returning to a place in the past. It means waking up to where we have always been, right here, in this breath, in this body, in this fragile and luminous world. May we awaken from whatever separates us. May we see clearly the causes of suffering. May our wisdom become compassion, and may our practice benefit all beings. If you like the posts here, and I hope you do, please consider subscribing for free or become a supporting member. Thank you, and may you and yours be well.